Chapter 30. I contemplated my situation as I slowly ate the food I'd been given. When I listened to my inner voice, deep down I wanted to be able to contact people, specifically my friends at school and Aaron, to let them know I was all right, then stay with the Yedramora as long as possible, learning their language and history. I knew that was unlikely, though, and that as soon as I spoke with the Sikuni, they would probably find a way for me to reach the nearest human city. I was no ambassador or historian. I hadn't been invited to learn from them. I was just a girl, lost in a jungle, dependent on strangers to help me find civilization again. I finished my food and emptied the water jug, then looked around again, unsure of what I was supposed to do next. Wait for Tirafu to come back? But I didn't know how long that would be. I decided to explore the little house, since it was apparently mine to use during my visit. Around the first corner from the table was a small kitchen area with several counters and cupboards, a ceramic sink with an actual faucet, and an old-fashioned wood-burning stove. I just stared at the room dumbly for a minute before walking over to the sink and turning on the faucet. Clear, cold water poured into the bowl below it. "Okay," I said to myself and continued around the room. I blinked rapidly several times as I took in the scene of a padded couch sitting across from a television. "Right," I eventually said. "Running water and electricity. On an island in the middle of the Amazon River. Man, have we got these people all backwards at home." I finished my circuit around the interior of the building, passing by the staircase without any further surprises, and walked to the door, stepping just outside the threshold to survey the area. 2 children were kicking a ball around a short distance away. Several people were walking purposefully to or from the docks carrying bags or baskets or other containers. Still others were working on or around buildings, swinging tools, and possibly fixing them up. I just stood and watched the scene for a while, trying to let my brain soak in the apparent juxtaposition of a simple hunter-gatherer society that also had modern technology. "Zoe," Tirafu greeted me warmly as he approached a minute or so later. "Are you feeling better now?" I nodded. "Yes, thank you, but I need to use the bathroom." I trailed off. That was the one thing I hadn't seen in the building, though I hadn't thought to look for it upstairs. Tirafu nodded knowingly. "This way." He led me to a small addition on the back of the house that I hadn't noticed before. I was surprised once again, though at that point I shouldn't have been, when I opened the door and saw a sink between a toilet and a ceiling-high cabinet with a curtained shower on the wall across from them. "Ah," I said simply. "I will be in the front when you are done," Tirafu said. He turned and left, giving me privacy. I quickly finished and found Tirafu where he had said he would be, watching the children, who had multiplied from 2 to 6, now playing some form of dodgeball. Tirafu was smiling as I walked up to him. "Are you ready to speak with our Sikuni now?" I took a deep breath, suddenly nervous for a reason I couldn't explain, and just nodded. As we began walking past the playing children, I suddenly had a vision of their ball flying at me, ready to hit me in the side of the head. I spun to the side and lifted my hands to eye level. I caught the flying projectile, then looked to the children who were running up to me. "Happy May," the little boy said as I handed him back the ball. "It's okay," I told him, smiling. Even if I didn't know what he said, the way he said it made it apparent it was an apology. When he didn't leave right away, I had to ask, "Is something wrong?" Both he and the little girl with him were staring at me. "Kistere sinu hosi," he said, ending it in a way that sounded like it was a question. I glanced at Tirafu. "He is asking why your skin is so dark," he explained, obviously trying to hide a smile. I smiled and looked to the children. "A long, long time ago, my many times great-grandparents came from Africa," I explained, looking at the boy as I said it. Even if he couldn't understand Portuguese, which I didn't think he could, one of the most important things you learned in caregiving is that you always talk to the person you're addressing, even if they can't understand you or respond. You never want to make anyone feel talked down to or like they didn't exist. The people there have very dark skin like me. I paused as Terafu translated it for them. When he had finished, I added, "Why is your skin brown?" A short pause for translation. "Didu kolehinu udhosi," the boy exclaimed, and the village leader finally did grin then. He says, "Everyone is this color except you." "Kis Africa?" the girl asked. Terafu gave a long response that I couldn't make out despite my keen ear for languages. The kids nodded, smiled at me, and waved as they ran off to play again. What did the girl say? She asked what Africa was. I explained to her that it is a land far across the ocean. Come now, Sikuni Selina is ready to talk to you. He led me back through the village to the largest tree I'd seen yet, and the biggest hut around it. It was decorated in fabrics and ribbons and feathers in all colors of the rainbow. Wow, I murmured. This is the house of the Fiku's leaders. It is home for both Sikune Selina and me, and will be home for those that follow us. We entered the bottom room. It was easily twice as large as the hut I'd been assigned to. A door, covered by a wooden cloth, stood in the middle of the first interior wall I'd yet seen. Terafu paused outside the door. You can go in, he told me, gesturing. I entered the back room. To my surprise, the woman seated on one of the chairs looked not much older than my mother. I'd been expecting an old crone, like the elderly wise woman of fantasy stories, because this is totally a Hollywood story. There was a young boy as well, probably between 10 and 12 years old. Both were watching me intently as I walked in. Welcome, Zoe. Please, sit. Her Portuguese, or at least her accent, was even better than Terafu's. I sat in one of the several chairs arranged around a large jaguar pelt rug and watched her in silence, not sure if I was supposed to speak first or let her begin. I know you have many questions. Feel free to ask all you want. I will answer what I can. I hesitated, not exactly sure what to say. Would a seer of every possible future already know what I would ask? Would she know how I could get home? How can I contact my friends? I blurted out. Do they know I'm still alive? Ah, she said and looked to the boy. He closed his eyes and frowned, appearing to think hard about something. When he opened his eyes, he shook his head sadly and said something to the lady. She nodded and replied, then looked to me. He is training to be the next Sikuni, but he is not yet strong enough to know what he sees. I waited impatiently for the answer to my question. I do not know what they know. So is there a way to tell them I'm okay? I asked again. There is a way, she said distantly, or we will send you back, or you will decide not to tell anyone. It depends what you think after we tell you a story. What story? What story could possibly make me change my mind about what I wanted to do? What did I want to do? We will tell you soon. What other questions do you want to ask? I bit back my frustration. I could already tell this conversation wasn't going to be the most straightforward. How did I end up here? I mean, lost in the jungle. What happened on the boat? Selina hesitated. I do not see the past, only the future. Right, I muttered to myself. Okay, how do you have things like indoor plumbing? I knew it was a stupid question as soon as I said it, but it was already out. The boy beamed. I know. We learn from outsiders. Out people go and learn things and come back and tell us. I was surprised at how good his Portuguese was, considering the other children hadn't seemed to know any at all. Rahidu, Selina snapped at him. Hosi siga maki mako nitina. The boy hung his head. Ape me. Ud emini feri. Nu isi, she said more gently. Lekemu hosi siga maki mako. Lead kirimi. Rahidu, if I understood the discussion properly, replied affirmatively. Isi hosi hika. Selina looked back at me. Another question? I stared at her for a moment. What did you two say? Selina sighed. He spoke without thinking. I scolded him. He will take more care next time. I nodded, thinking. I didn't want to blurt out something inane again. Well, I am talking to another precog. Okay, so why can I see things that won't necessarily happen? And why only sometimes? Ah, Selena said slowly. This is a difficult question. Outside, you only see what will happen, yes? I nodded. Here, you can see what might happen, but you do not see everything. I shook my head. I didn't know anybody could see everything. Your Sika is different to ours, but I think maybe you only see the one thing most likely to happen. Sika? Siku. Sikuni. Precog talent. But I kept seeing the river even when it was like half a day away. Selena pursed her lips, thinking. Were you looking for the river? I nodded. I thought following it would be the best way to find my people. I stammered over the word civilization, since I didn't want to offend her by possibly implying she wasn't civilized. Selena nodded decisively. Then you saw it because you were looking for it. Okay. I hesitated before asking my next question, not sure what answer I was hoping for. When can I go home? The Sakuni looked to Rahidu. He closed his eyes, a look of intense concentration on his face when he spoke. Usually in a moon's time you will go home. But you need help if you search or you will get lost. Sometimes you will go home soon. Or you will stay, but that is not likely. The woman nodded. Very good. What? I asked, dumbfounded. Get lost? Doing what? And search for what? You will know after the story. I took a deep breath and smiled with my lips closed, trying not to get frustrated. Can you tell me the story then? I asked between closed teeth. Selena watched me silently for a moment, then nodded and settled more comfortably into her chair. Rahidu sat forward attentively, watching Selena like that of a child listening to a teacher. Which was probably the situation, come to think of it. Rahidu seemed to have quite the precognition talent. But people don't get their talents until puberty. Outside, anyway. Another oddity to this magical world. There is a legend among us who live in Isonu, the peoples you know as the Yedramora, Selena was saying. I quickly refocused on the Sikuni. Now that she was finally talking, I did not want to miss her story. Long ago, a Pisani and a prince battled an evil sorceress. A what? I interrupted. Pisani. It is like a prince or princess, but will not be a leader. Oh, okay. I nodded for the Sikuni to continue. The sorceress almost killed the prince and Pisani when a magic kimu the Pisani wore spoke. It said it could take them away to save them from certain death, but it would have to take the sorceress too, and they may never be able to return to the life they left behind. Sikuni Selena paused in her telling when she noticed the look on my face. I didn't know exactly what she saw, but I imagined it was somewhere between disbelief and panic. Are you feeling well? She asked. I stammered, not knowing what to say. My chest was ice cold. I didn't know what a kimu was, but I had an idea. The story she was telling me sounded much too similar to a dream I'd had several months earlier to be coincidence. Was this ever written down somewhere? Maybe I read about it somewhere? Selena regarded me steadily. I do not know. I was told the story by the Sakune who taught me, and to her by her teacher, and so on back to the time when the story happened. Maybe others have written and shared, but it is not likely. I nodded numbly. Okay. What happened next? I whispered. The Pisani right away accepted the deal the Kimu made. Selena continued her telling. Although the sorceress was evil, the Pisani could not live without the prince, so the Kimu did like it said. The three disappeared from the world and were never heard from again. The Risare Sakune used her sight to try to ease the Risare's sadness at the loss of his Pisani. She told him that they were taken to the distant future to be reincarnated one day, but she didn't know if they were to be born as Yedramora or as one of your people in the outside world. And how... I swallowed hard, reminding myself to keep breathing. Breathing is good. Breathing keeps you alive. How does anyone know their story when they disappeared, how it happened? There were others there. The guards followed the Pisane to the sorceress, but were too slow to stop what happened. But they saw it all and told the Risara what happened. And he made sure his keeper of stories knew it and would tell it to his students and them to theirs, so the Pisane's sacrifice would never be forgotten. What's a Risara? It's like a king or queen, Sekuni Selena explained. The leader of the Yedramora. I wouldn't have thought the Yedramora would have a king, I said to myself. If they had a prince, why not a king? Selena smiled. Long ago, all of Esonu was united by a Risara, but what happened to them is another story. Is it one you could tell me? My curiosity about the Yedramora got the better of me, and it would have been a welcome distraction from trying to sort through my mix of feelings about hearing a dream my sleeping brain had made up supposedly become actual events. There was a long moment of silence as the Sukuni's eyes lost focus in a way I was beginning to associate with her using her precog talent. Not now. You will have much to think about tonight and decisions to make. You will come back tomorrow and ask me more questions and tell me what you have decided to do. Do? What do you mean do? What are my choices? You have all the choices you want, the Sukune said, smiling. I would have been frustrated with her return to enigmatic answers if I hadn't been so off-balanced by the story. Do you have anything else to ask? Not right now, I said, then quickly amended my response as something occurred to me. Actually, yes. Do you know the name of the Pisani, or the other two? I cannot say. She shook her head sadly. Okay then, I guess that's all, I said quietly. She turned to Rahidu. Please lead her out. The boy jumped to his feet and grinned at me. Come! Thank you, I said to Selena as I followed Rahidu to the door. She smiled at me and inclined her head as I left. When you go back to your room, food is on the table for you. Rahidu looked at me brightly. You will come back tomorrow to talk to Sekuni Selena again? I think so. Probably. I don't know. The boy nodded. That is what I see too. You will decide tonight. You are studying to become Sekuni? I asked him as I stepped outside the house. He nodded enthusiastically. Sekuni Selena says I am a strong Siku and will learn fast. How long have you been training? I was pretty sure I was asking, more because I wanted to put off dealing with the complex emotions swirling inside myself than out of curiosity, though that was there too. He considered, just over one crossing of the hunter. I frowned in confusion. What does that mean? The hunter, he said, pointing towards the sky. He chases the sun. He is overhead on the longest night of the year and is gone when he fights the sun. I looked up, even though I knew I wouldn't see anything, both because it was day and because the tree canopy blocked the sky. I looked back to Rahidu. The hunter Caden? I asked. The boy's eyes flew open and he looked around as if expecting someone to have overheard me. Do not say that name, Rahidu hissed. I blinked, taken aback. Why not? Rahidu pursed his lips. Tomorrow, Sekuni Selena will tell you if you come back. With that, he turned and walked back inside. Without any other options, I also turned and headed back to the hut I'd been given. I didn't know exactly where I was, but the village wasn't very large, and, as it turned out, my precognitions kicked in again when I headed in the correct direction. I almost tripped on my feet when it happened. You saw it because you were looking for it. As Rahidu predicted, there was more food and water waiting for me on the table when I arrived at the house. I wasn't hungry again yet, so I just took it upstairs with me. I was exhausted and didn't really want to make the walk downstairs again later, or know if the food would even still be there if I did. My house. I can eat in bed if I want, right? I chose a bed with line of sight to the doorway, set the food and drink on the nearest table, and laid down before finally letting my thoughts have their way with me. Dozens of questions vied for my attention. How could I know the story? Why did she tell it to me? I've barely been here a couple hours and they're already telling an outsider a legend carefully passed down through the generations. Why? Sakune Selina's words echoed in my thoughts along with all the questions. The Risare Sakune used her sight to ease the Risare's sadness at the loss of his Pisani. She told him that they were taken to the distant future to be reincarnated one day. I shied away from the most logical and, I believed, least likely conclusion. No, I had read about it somewhere. Some other version by some other culture. Maybe one of the storyteller's apprentices told the wrong person, who passed it along to someone else outside the Amazon, until it became a myth from different people. I'd read a lot of mythologies. I was going for a minor in world literature, after all. But even if it was the case that, despite not remembering I read it, my mind had created a dream based on the story, it still didn't explain why Sakune Selina would tell me, a total stranger, the story in the first place. Maybe she saw herself telling it to me in one of her precognitions? Okay, but if she could see all the possible futures, why would she choose that one? I couldn't answer that question, so I asked myself a different one. Assuming the Yedramora did find one of their reincarnated people, what would they want from them? Proof? How? Anybody who knew the story could say they were one of the three and give details about what happened that nobody knew, but that couldn't be validated or invalidated either. After futilely chasing my thoughts around until the sky began to darken, I gave in to the train of thought I'd been trying to avoid. Okay, just say I'm some reincarnated ancient princess. I muttered softly to myself that the dream was actually some kind of past memory. Then what? I paused, thinking. Then she probably told me the story because she knew I'd recognize it. How? How could someone who only saw the future know I would recognize it? Because she saw me doing something I wouldn't do if I hadn't heard the story. Like what? I grumbled. Stay here? Try to find the other people? I groaned when an image of Mikhail's face flashed through my thoughts. I hadn't thought about him since before the boat ride, and this was not a good time to be reminiscing about lost love. But I understood it was because my wishful heart wanted to think that maybe if I was the lost princess, he could be the lost prince, and that we were meant to be together now because we had been in the past. I let out a half-shout, half-cry of despair and rolled over to my stomach, burying my face in the surprisingly soft pillow on the bed. Bird down. Easy enough to find, I'm sure. My brain thought, trying to find relief from the barrage of anxiety and confusion I'd been feeling since my life had been turned upside down 2 days ago. 2 months ago. I growled at myself and rolled over again. I was done thinking, done feeling. I just wanted to sleep. But sleep was a long time in coming and left me feeling less rested than before I had crawled into bed.